Welcome to Stories from the Village of Nothing Much. Like easy listening, but for fiction. I'm Kathryn Nicolai. I write and read all the stories you'll hear on the Village of Nothing Much. Audio engineering and sound design is by Bob Wittersheim. In our show notes, you'll find links to our ad-free premium version, our other shows, and our own weighted pillows. This is a collaboration with a lovely team at Quiet Mind, and these pillows provide deep pressure stimulation, which helps to shift your nervous system from fight or flight to rest and digest. I have one here in the booth with me at all times, and I use mine when I meditate. I hold it on my lap or lay down and rest it on my chest. It's really soothing and it makes a great gift. The link is in our notes. Did you get my secret message? To meet up at the clubhouse? Yep. Good. It's another official meeting of the secret society of people who like nice stuff. It cracked me up. But listen, that is all this is. When you need a little break from the world, when you want to rest your mind someplace soft and safe, when you want to go where everyone knows your name. Wait, I'm getting mixed up. Anyway, I'm here to be your resident storyteller. I've built a little world where we can relax and enjoy. And I'll tell you about it as you go for a walk or drive around or do whatever it is you're doing. My stories are always family friendly, and lots of folks let me know they listen with their kids on road trips or before bed to wind down. If you stick around at the end of the episode, I'll talk a little about how the stories connect to one another and or to me. Now, because it's always a good way to start, let's take a deep inhale through the nose and sigh from your mouth. Nice. Do it one more time. Breathe in and let it go. Good. Our stories today take us near and far in the Village of Nothing Much. We'll start in downtown, in mornings at the coffee shop, where we'll fight off the cold with hot drinks and care for our neighbors. Then we'll travel out to the chalet on the mountains in fresh snow for out-of-doors fun and evening recouping around the fire pit. Finally, we'll come back to town for an impromptu meal in the diner on the corner, in Out to Breakfast. Mornings at the coffee shop. All was dark downtown as I pulled into the alley behind the coffee shop. Well, the Christmas lights still twinkled on the storefronts, and there was a light on at the bakery. But other than that, all was dark and cold. Gosh, it was cold this morning. We were in that part of winter when the temperature doesn't make it above freezing for weeks at a time, and most folks don't leave their house without a good reason. But coffee is a very good reason. I hurried to the back door of the cafe and fumbled with my keys in my mittened hand. I did not want to take those mittens off, but getting the key in the lock took an unearthly degree of focus in the bitter cold. I took a steadying breath and lined it up and twisted till the lock gave and the door opened. I stepped through into the warm shop and locked the door again behind me. I stood for a moment and let the chill shake out of me. We still had a tree up and decorated in our front window, and in the darkness, it reflected prettily through the space. The colored lights bounced off the white marble tables, and I hummed a Christmas song that was still stuck in my head while I unwound my scarf. I hung my coat and wrappings on the rack in the back room and took a clean apron from the shelf. I wrapped it around myself, tying the strings in front and tucking a fresh towel through them. I folded back the cuffs on my shirt and rolled them a time or two, and began to feel a bit more awake, a bit more human, and a bit more hospitable. I'd heard a news story once about a town somewhere, a little village on another continent, who were known for something they called radical hospitality. Guests, tourists, travelers were welcomed with such earnest warmth that their time there felt like a dream. And for the people of the village, it was a point of pride. None of it was put on. It wasn't a show. It was a core part of their culture. I'd pulled my car over to listen to the story. I'd been so gripped by it and felt like it was expressing something that I'd always felt but hadn't had the words for. To make someone feel welcome and cared for when they come into your house or shop or restaurant, well, it felt very important to me too. And that's why I don't mind opening my coffee shop on a freezing, dark morning. I'd get to welcome people, to warm their bellies and spirits with our offerings, and that was always a pleasure and a duty I took seriously. But first, as the philosophers say, coffee. After all, you cannot pour from an empty cup. So I flicked on the lights over the espresso machine and set about filling mine. The sound of grinding beans echoed through the empty cafe, and as I tamped the grounds and screwed the portafilter into the brewing head, I could smell the rich, roasted scent. There was a hint of chocolate and a nuttiness like hazelnuts in the aroma. And as that first cup brewed with a thick, pale crema on top, my mouth watered in anticipation. Before the morning was out, I would have several cups. Probably one as a latte, one macchiato, and an Americano near the end of my shift. But this first one was just a plain shot that I sipped as soon as it was ready. I felt it lighting me up with warmth and energy. After the last sip, I slipped the cup into the washer and reset the machine for our first customer. I looked at the clock and realized the first customer would probably be here in just a few minutes. Luckily, closing staff did an excellent job of setting us up to open. It was part of our hospitality. It wasn't just for guests, but also for each other. When you came in, you'd find the person before you had left your station neat and prepped. The towels were clean and waiting in the dryer. The hopper was full of beans and the cups were restocked. So all that was left for me was to turn on the lights, add some music, and unlock the door. We sold bagels and muffins, cornetti, plain or filled with pistachio cream from the bakery. I used to have to bundle up and walk down there on these cold mornings, but they delivered now and usually showed up a half hour or so after we opened. In fact, I could see their delivery guy just now, bundled up and heading to the diner with a loaded tray in his hands. We were a little web of connections in this town. The bakery kept us all in fresh bread and treats. The diner fed us waffles and sandwiches. My coffee shop kept us all awake. The bookshop, the record store, that place that repaired bikes, the flower shop, we all kept each other going. And speaking of, as I went to unlock the door, I found the man who owned the bike repair shop waiting on the doorstep. He looked frozen, and as I pushed the door open for him, he hurried in. "Don't tell me you rode to town today," I said, certain I already knew the answer. He looked a bit stunned by the cold and just nodded as he tucked his hands under his arms. I pointed to the seat closest to the radiators and told him to sit down and thaw out. Luckily, I knew his order. It was another point of pride for me. It went right along with the hospitality. If I've made your coffee 3 times, I won't forget how you like it. His was a large Americano with an inch of steamed oat milk on top. And on Saturdays, he got a bit of cinnamon syrup added in. And it was Saturday, and I figured he would need the extra boost either way. As I began to make his drink, another barista came in through the back door and tied on an apron. Customers began to shuffle in as well, and the rhythm of the morning at the coffee shop took over. People gathered in clumps at tables and along the bar in the front window. The bakery order came, and we stocked the pastry case by the register. My frozen friend drained his Americano and waved a thank you before heading back into the cold. The big table against the back wall filled up with the neighborhood grandpas with their newspapers and corny jokes. When I leaned in with a fresh carafe to fill their cups, one of them whispered to me, "Do you ever wonder why you don't see hippos hiding in the trees?" I sighed and waited. Yeah, it's because they're really good at it. Oh boy. I chuckled and went back to work. Yes, one way or another, we all kept each other going through the winter. Fresh snow. Fresh snow had fallen overnight. Another 3 or 4 inches of the light, fluffy kind that, while it couldn't be packed into a snowball or rolled to stack one atop another with a carrot nose and twig arms, was really lovely to kick through with winter boots, or stride across with snowshoes, or slide over with a pair of freshly waxed skis. In fact, I'd spent the day before trekking in my snowshoes with friends on a long trail that wound through the woods and beside a frozen lake. We'd stopped every now and then to catch our breath and take in the shades of white and blue and icy dark gray that lay in layers on the landscape. At the edge of the lake, whose surface was streaked and marbled with brighter, thicker layers of ice, like a shining, clear granite, I'd noticed the upturned stems of Queen Anne's lace. The petals had fallen away months ago, but the stems and woody veins remained, and now held a tiny pocket of fresh snow, like wine in a glass. Though the day was cold, the steady push of my legs and pull from my poles had kept me plenty warm, and I'd loved the feeling of cool air on my cheeks as we made our slow progress through foothills and bare brush back to the ski lodge. We'd followed the long walk with an equally long, lingering rest around the fireplace in the lodge. It was a cozy space, lined with brick and stone, tall windows that looked out on the slopes, and old worn wood floors. The ceilings were high with knotty beams running the length of the room, and the fire was sunken in a pit with soft benches all around. We'd unbundled from our coats and hats and gloves and met up there for hot drinks. I'd propped my feet in their insulated socks up on the bricks around of the fireplace and let out a deep, contented sigh. My friends chatted about the things we'd seen on our walk. The long, low profile of a fox, its ruddy brown fur standing out against the white as he glided through the trees. The bubbles caught in the surface of the lake, and tiny dots high up on the slope cutting a smooth zigzag down through the mountain. A tray of drinks arrived, coffees and cocos and toddies with sweet and strong-smelling steam rising off them. I'd ordered a hot chocolate, and it came with a peppermint stick, which slowly melted into the chocolate as I'd stirred. It had been a pleasure just to sit and listen to my friends as they talked. It was something I valued more as I got older. Friends I could just quietly be with. I didn't need to talk or push the moment forward. We were all just happy to be around each other. We'd easily read books shoulder to shoulder on a sofa for an hour, or watch an old movie till someone fell asleep and someone else covered them up with a blanket. It was a good place to be in your life when you realized you didn't need to prove anything to the people you were sharing your time with. You didn't need to be clever or have a joke to tell. Just showing up as yourself was enough. That night after the fire had died down, after we trooped off to dinner and sleepily to our own rooms, I'd run a hot bath for myself. My muscles were well worked from our snowshoeing, and a good long soak sounded just right. As the water filled the tub, I'd trailed in a good amount of Epsom salts. I smiled to myself in the dark room. It seemed a sign I was definitely getting older. That when packing for a weekend away, I'd been sure to bring Epsom salts and peppermint oil for sore muscles. Well, that was fine by me. Getting older seemed to me to just be another way to say, making friends with yourself. I turned off the water and set a towel by the tub. I left the room dark. There was a window which seemed oddly placed, up high on the opposite wall. But once I'd slid down into the tub, I saw that it was perfectly aligned for gazing out at the mountain. That's when it had started to snow. I'd been watching the moment the first flakes formed and fell. The whole world seemed quiet as it came down. The wind kicked up a bit, and I watched as small cyclones of whirling snow spun until they spun themselves out. At last, with my fingertips wrinkling in the water, I drained the tub and wrapped myself in a thick robe. When I climbed into bed and pulled the blanket over my shoulder, I imagined my friends were all well into their dreams by now. The snow kept falling through the night, and when I woke up today, I'd seen those fresh 3 or 4 inches. We met back up around the breakfast table and agreed today would be the perfect day for skiing. The lodge made their own homemade granola of toasted oats, cinnamon, and walnuts, and I filled my bowl with it, adding a sliced banana and coconut milk. We ate hearty to carry us through the morning on the slopes, and soon we were zipping back into our gear and clicking our skis into place. I'd come late to skiing, and my first season I'd taken lessons, cautiously juddering down tiny hills while 6-year-olds blazed past me shouting encouragement. Since then I'd figured out that the more I relaxed, the less rigidly I held myself on my skis, the smoother the ride would be. It still took me a few runs to settle into a rhythm, but soon I was gliding from one run to another, feeling the fresh air rush past me and pulling it deep into my lungs. My friends and I would sometimes catch up with each other and race to the bottom or ride the chairlift back up together. I loved watching the chairlift climb, the swinging legs of excited little ones against the blue sky as we headed up to do it all over again. I knew we would make our way up and down the hill until we had thoroughly worn ourselves out, and follow it up just as we had yesterday, with feet up in front of the fire and hot chocolate and a good dinner, and that I could have another bath, another long look out the window, and another night's deep sleep. Out for breakfast. It wouldn't be unusual to go out for lunch, to take a break from work or study and get away for a meal. I did it pretty regularly, sometimes with a friend, sometimes with a book, but there was always a bit of haste in the experience, always something to get back to once the cup of coffee was empty, the last bite of sandwich finished. And going out to dinner, I do that too, sometimes dressed up a bit on a Saturday night with a group of friends, someplace with pretty dishes on a white tablecloth and a piano player tucked into the corner. Or on a not-too-busy weeknight, treating myself to a meal at my neighborhood spot. But going out to breakfast is different. You're not in a hurry when you go out to breakfast, or at least I am not. When I was little, it was something I did with my dad. Just me and him, out on a cold Saturday morning, sitting in a booth in the diner. Him with a coffee, me with a hot chocolate, watching people passing on the street. He'd stop on our way in to buy a paper from the orange box on the corner with a few quarters from his pocket, and as soon as he sat down, he'd dig out the comics and pass them over. Thinking back on those breakfasts, they were both special and absolutely ordinary, which is a lovely thing. As I got older, going out to breakfast sometimes came after a long night out with friends. How much energy we had then to dance and talk and go new places, after which we'd put a solid meal in our stomachs, hug each other goodbye, and find our way back to our beds for a lazy day. It had been a while since I'd had a breakfast like that, and while I didn't necessarily miss it, I looked back fondly on those times, the fun I'd had, the very good sleep that came after a plate of hash browns and pancakes. Now, going out for breakfast was about a slow morning, a special cup of coffee, not rushing through my day. And I'd woken today with a craving to do just those things. It stood in my kitchen, dunking a tea bag into hot water and shivering a bit, even with my fluffiest robe wrapped around me. My stomach was grumbling, but when I peeked in the fridge, I didn't see anything to inspire much of an appetite. That's when I realized I didn't want tea and frozen waffles. I wanted a latte and a menu full of options. I'd set my cup in the sink and gone to get dressed. While I was pulling on thick socks and my favorite, softest hoodie, I thought about a friend I'd bumped into a few weeks before. I'd been leaving a holiday party, sneaking out, in fact. Not because I mightn't have had fun if I'd stayed. I'd just spent all of my social budget and wanted my bed. On the sidewalk, I met my friend and we both promised to get together another time. Well, this morning was another time, wasn't it? I sent her a message with all the breakfast food emojis and the name of a favorite diner. She texted back straight away, the single word, "When?" And I sent back, "Now, my treat." She sent a thumbs up and a heart, and I was glad I'd thought of her. Sometimes the more you plan something, the less appealing it becomes. When it's a spur-of-the-moment thought, I don't know, it just feels lighter, more fun. Boots, coat, hat, and gloves, I stepped out on the stoop. I'd thought I might walk. The diner was only about 10 minutes away by foot, but the cold that hit me as I locked the door was surprising, to say the least. It was a day for softer choices, so I got my car from the garage and drove slowly along the snowy streets into town. There weren't many people out. We were still in that very sleepy part of January. We hadn't collectively geared back up since the holiday. I found a spot on the street and was just about to put a few quarters into the meter when someone called out from the opposite corner. "You don't have to pay on Sunday." And I smiled at them and waved. I'd have to repay that good turn later. The diner windows were steamed up against the cold morning air, and when I stepped inside, I could smell all the good scents of breakfast cooking. They had a long counter that ran down one side of the place and booths that wrapped around the windows. I spotted an empty one and looked at a waitress pouring coffee at the counter. She smiled and gestured for me to make myself comfortable. I sighed as I unbuttoned my coat and slipped it onto a hook beside the booth. The neon open sign in the record shop across the street blinked on as I sat down, and I wondered what album they were playing this morning. The waitress carried over water glasses and menus and took my order for a latte. At the counter, a gray-haired man was standing up, pulling his coat and hat on, and our eyes met for a moment. He had a newspaper in his hands, a bit mussed as if he'd thumbed through every page. He held it up with his eyebrows raised and said, "I'm all done. Would you like it?" It reminded me so much of my breakfasts with Dad. I had to swallow down a lump in my throat before I could answer. "Thanks," I said as I reached out for it. The comics page, printed in color in the Sunday edition, was sticking out about halfway through the heavy sheath, and I smiled at the man as he handed it over. It was just a small, ordinary moment for him, but for me it was a special bit of synchronicity that I wouldn't forget. I watched the man step out onto the sidewalk as the waitress set down my latte beside the paper. Down the street, my friend got out of her car and spotted me in the window. We waved. Ordinary and special were twisted together in my mind, reminding me to see goodness everywhere, and then to settle in and enjoy it. Okay, secret society members. Clearly, at this time of year, I am thinking a lot about breakfast foods and a little about trekking in the out of doors. We started with mornings at the coffee shop. This is a location in the village that is frequently referenced but had never had its own story. This was a bonus episode, by the way, only available for our premium subscribers, at least till right now. The bit about radical hospitality came straight from my own life. I'd heard the story on NPR, and I had been on my way to teach a yoga class, and this immediately became my theme for the day. It's something I think about a lot, was not always good at, and have become much more adept at: making people feel welcome. After this story first came out on Nothing Much Happens, several people wrote asking me if the news story was real and where it happened, but I was never able to find it again. If you are a longtime listener, you might have caught that bit about how the first delivery of the morning from the bakery goes to the diner. There has been a long-standing connection/flirtation between the baker and a waitress at the diner, and that goes back to the very first bakery story. Check in on it in episodes 17 and 31 of this show. By the way, if you're thinking pistachio cream, how do I get my hot little mitts on that? I have a recommendation, and I'll put a link to it in our show notes. This is not a paid ad. I just really love this stuff. It's the sweet pistachio spread by Fine and Raw. And let me tell you, on some toast, on a cornetto, it is amazing, and it's vegan. There's also a nod in this episode to the table of grandpas, first mentioned in the episode called People Watching and the Coffee Shop, which, wait, so the coffee shop did have its own story already? Okay, yes, but it wasn't told from the perspective of the barista. I'm splitting that hair pretty finely, I'm aware. Anyway, in that story, we hear about how nearly every coffee shop has a table of grandpas, arguing and reading newspapers and nursing black coffee. And the narrator in that story secretly adopts one of them as her own grandpa in her mind. And this still makes me laugh. This story was the story one review leaver on Audible first listened to and was very offended by. He was an older man himself, and he said this represented older men as grouchy, and he didn't like that, which, in fairness, I think I represented them as charmingly grouchy and in no way suggested all grandpas were like them. Anyway, a few weeks later, he left another review saying he couldn't figure out how to get my stupid podcast off his phone and what was the matter with everyone. And I just wondered, did he see the connection here? Because I feel like he could have just sat at the table and sipped his coffee with the others. And just a reminder, the review section is not a place to get tech support. We can't even see your name or have any way to respond to you at all. If you need tech support, go to our website, DM us through our social media pages, or give it a good old-fashioned Google. A lot of issues people have with working their podcast apps are fixed with a quick search. Next, we heard Fresh Snow, a story about a trip to a ski resort for fun on the slopes and hot drinks in the lodge. I think this could be the same chalet featured in my story's Winter Getaway, which is episode 5. Now, I have snowshoed once. It didn't go great, and I have skied a couple of times. The first time I went with my wife, and she's a solid skier. I signed up for a lesson while she did various runs. And the lesson went okay, and I went out on a few of the bunny hills, and then she texted me to see if I was ready for a drink in the lodge, which I was. It had been maybe 2 hours, so I took off all my rented ski equipment, and I turned it all in and met her at the bar. And she said, "Where's your stuff?" And I was like, "I turned it in." And she laughed and said, "Well, usually, you take a break and you eat something, you have a drink, and then you go back out. We would be skiing all afternoon." And I remember just thinking, this isn't for me. I was used to going to yoga for an hour or so, going on a hike or to the gym, but once you did the thing, you moved on with your life. I didn't get that it was supposed to be an all-day activity. And while I've tried it a few more times, I think my initial assessment was correct, and it is just not my thing. Which is okay, because pretty much nothing is for everyone. Our last story, Out to Breakfast, is one that could be happening on the same morning as our first story in the coffee shop. The orange newspaper boxes are so nostalgic to me. I definitely remember my dad stopping to grab a copy of the Flint Journal from them when I was a kid. I think it cost $0.25, and I remember that it was basically an honesty box because the mechanism didn't actually work by recognizing the money he paid. You could drop in anything and open it, or drop nothing and open it. But my dad always paid for his paper. I mentioned the loveliness of spontaneity in this episode, and that is something I personally love. I love to call a friend and say, "What are you doing right now? Want to meet up?" And I gotta tell you, it works better than planning ahead. It's way more fun. So maybe try it this week. Oh my goodness, I just realized this is our last episode of the year, my friends. Thank you so much for visiting the village with me. Where will we go next year? I have some big ideas. You know, the big, small kind. The ordinary, special kind. Till then, I wish you delicious coffee, hot baths, and a page of comics to read with breakfast.